my pleasure to be here today and speak with you, and my presentation is going to be somewhat different than the past presentations because I'm going to start out with a question. Can any of you remember a time that you had enough money to do everything that you needed to do? And for the delegates, I would assume that most of you would say, no, I can never remember that time during my career. And yet, years ago, we still face social and economic issues, just like today, except today there are many more social and more complex economic issues than we've ever faced in the past. And so with my presentation, I want to start out with a short outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and historical significance of these social and economic issues, how we arrived at them. I want to touch on current events, future trends, and then some of the changes that perhaps we ought to think about, because if we're going to move ahead, we're going to have to recraft the way we do business. The old standards simply aren't working. Let me start out very simply. This is a geographic map of the United States, and the reason for this significance is because in our country, the geography varies so much from one coast to the other, and yet critical issues like aggregates that we use for our road business come from varying portions of our country. And for the most part, our aggregates are substandard. There are some pockets in the United States that have very good aggregates, but other pockets in the country have very poor aggregates. And to open up a new quarry or pit to get a new aggregate source will take a minimum of 10 years due to all of the regulations, the environmental regulations and so on. So what has happened is many states are, and many highway agencies are using substandard aggregates. We're not really looking at life cycle costing, we're looking at initial cost, because to bring in aggregates from a remote location scares the agencies to death. There are a few states that do bring in aggregates from a distance, but that adds costs. The other variable that we're faced with in the United States is our population densities, because the United States is not a uniformly dense population. A matter of fact, if you look at our different states across the United States, we have some states that have very highly populated densities per square kilometer, while other states have very small population densities. And compare that with the European Union, and you can see that it's in some ways the same, but in some ways different. And then when you look at the land area that the United States has, it even makes it more difficult to address our highway needs. These are some serious factors that all weigh into decision-making with highway agencies in the United States. Because our highway system and our interstate, what you would call your motorways, is 75,000 and more kilometers. Our national highway system, which I'll explain, is 256,000 kilometers. And our state and local road system is enormous. These are all significant factors. Back in 1921, the Federal Highway Act defined what the functional classifications were of roads in the United States. Now, why was this important? Because this determined how the money would be distributed. You see, for principal arterials, for the most part, these are considered your major roadways that carry the largest share of traffic, and therefore they are eligible for the federal dollar, the federal funding. Minor arterials are largely in the state systems, and then collectors and local agencies, for the most part, are local government agencies. Now, it may surprise you with the jurisdictional authorities. The federal government in the United States only has jurisdiction over approximately 3% of the roadways, only 3%. The state governments, all 50 states, have jurisdiction of about 19% of all of our roadways. Our local agencies carry about 77%. So think about that. 77% are our local agencies, and then our toll authorities are approximately 1%. It builds a complexity into the system that maybe we don't need. Let's talk about financing for a moment. Financing began, I believe the year was 2019. It was called the Federal Road Act. And it created funding for agencies across the United States, for federal agencies. But states were left to do the business on their own, and the same with the local agencies. And therefore, there are a multitude of ways that revenues are achieved in the United States. Over the years, these funding sources have been enhanced and made more complex until recently we have found that about 40% of all of the dollars in the federal budget have been pulled away for non-transportation uses such as lighthouses, bike trails, things that we do not look at as far as for highway needs. Museums, there are numerous things. We also pay for the mass transit systems out of the federal trust fund, because in the United States, no mass transit system is self-supporting. They cannot pay their own way, even the largest ones. In 1956, the Highway Trust Fund was established, and that was the beginning of the interstate construction era. That gave us a purpose. The country was moving in a direction to build an interstate system from coast to coast. And that was largely completed in a record time of less than 50 years. However, looking back at it, we could never build that interstate system today due to the numerous regulations and the prohibitive costs. And so we have a system right now, counting our interstate system, our state system, and our local system, that have values in excess of $3 trillion US. We can never afford to rebuild it. The federal highway system was largely a capital-intense program, and all of the money in the trust fund went for capital projects. That's the construction and major rehabilitation projects in the country. It was a good deal because in those days, and I'm going back to 1956, the federal government would put 90% of the money forth, and the state agencies would put 10% of the money forth. Later, that was modified where the federal government put in a little less, but they still put in 80%, and the state agencies put in 20%, and that's pretty much where things are today. But there's a non-federal role, and that is what stewardship is all about. Because the federal government told the states that we will help you build it, but states, you have to maintain it. And you have to maintain it with your own budgets. Well, what it really was is a perverse incentive, because the states would say, why would I want to take my money and spend it on maintenance when I can take my money and parlay it into an 80% dividend by matching federal dollars? And so what has happened is, through this financial arrangements, the operation and maintenance budgets have largely gone flat in the states, where the focus has been more on capital projects. And now we are paying the big price. The Highway Trust Fund is in serious trouble. And this was the budget, or the revenue stream, that feeds our federal capital outlay projects. This year, sometime around June or July, we effectively will have an insolvent system, one that we can no longer maintain or construct because there's simply not enough money. Later on, maybe the 1st of August, the trust fund will be completely out of money. Now, we've seen these warning signs in the past. In 2008, $9 billion was transferred from the general fund to the Highway Trust Fund by Congress. In 2009, $8 billion was transferred from the general fund to the Highway Trust Fund. Again, in 2010, the same thing. Money's been transferred, and most lately, within the last reauthorization bill, money has been transferred. But we cannot pay or sustain this approach. We're simply out of money. Now, you'll find it interesting because Congress authorizes monies every 6 years, or supposedly every 6 years, through a transportation authorization bill. These bills have not been passed on a regular basis, so rather than a 6-year bill, some of them have been a 3-year bill, some of them have been 24 months, and largely they've been extensions. That's the authorization portion. But after the authorization portion, there's an appropriation portion where Congress has to actually appropriate money. And even though the authorization process will indicate that there's going to be a lot of money that can be spent on roadways, the appropriation portion where the monies are actually given are always much less. So we're in a deep financial crisis right now in the United States. The federal gas tax has not been increased in 22 years. It's currently 18.4%, and there's a diesel tax that is 24.4%. And when I say that, on every U.S. gallon of gasoline, 18.4 cents is levied. And on every gallon of diesel fuel, 24.4 cents is levied. That is what has funded our transportation system in the United States for many, many years. But with the advent of fuel-efficient vehicles, electric vehicles, the trust fund has diminished as far as its reserves go. Actually, our General Accounting Office has issued an extreme crisis warning on the Highway Trust Fund. So where do the states get their money? And the local agencies? Every state is slightly different. So some states may pull it out of one area, such as a gasoline tax. Others may pull it out of property taxes or charge vehicles. There are a number of funding streams, and every state is slightly different. And that adds to the complexity of the issue. So I'm going to say what we really need are some new ways we think about things. Because first of all, it's a given. The public is extremely dependent upon our transportation system, and you do not change that culture overnight for sure. Our highway infrastructure is decaying before our very eyes. Our roads are getting worse and worse. And our politicians lack the political will to provide leadership on these difficult issues. They have their head in the sand. They're more interested in their political future than they are in making the difficult decisions in most cases. The last highway authorization bill was a big paradigm shift because it introduced more transparency in how monies are spent. And so to improve the transparency, they developed highway performance measures to achieve these national goals. These are pavement performance measures, bridge performance measures, literally a measure on everything that is out there in as far as our transportation assets. However, let me add one personal note to this. Our performance measures are an old system. It's on ride, it's on rut, it's on cracking, it's on faulting. It's on the type of measures that we've used for years and years, and it does not address what we really need, and those are maintenance indicators or maintenance measures. Because as an engineer, we all know that we can look at the pavement and we can see things happening. We're losing film thickness from our asphalt, and we begin raveling. We are losing our pavement life due to oxidation. We need measures that will bring this all together. And then we develop these asset management plans, because asset management has become a buzzword. Everybody likes a buzzword. And so asset management is our new buzzword. The idea to preserve our asset, minimize our whole life costs. We should be doing that anyway. We shouldn't need an asset management program to tell us that. Anybody that's worked in this business knows that we can pull construction projects off the table until the money is gone, and it will not have an overall change on our highway network condition. We need pavement preservation and maintenance activities to change our current highway conditions. It's a given. To operate financially in a sustainable manner, we cannot afford to use the old template. We've got to do things differently. We've got to create a framework to improve the long-term performance of our roadway, and that means, in the recent research that we're just beginning to unwrap, we have to do pavement preservation very early in a pavement's life. That's what separates us as engineers and pavement practitioners from the public. If we wait till a crack is apparent, we wait till a pothole is apparent, we as a professional are no different than the general public that can see that distress as well. We have to raise the bar for ourselves. We have to be able to look at things and determine long before the public sees issues that we have problems, and we need to address them. Applied pavement preservation is asset management, and applied asset management is pavement preservation or bridge preservation or whatever. It's all about taking care of what we already own. It's not about building new, it's taking care of what we already have. And we have even bigger problems in store for us. And these problems are that our transportation agencies in the United States are going to lose their senior and their experienced staff at a tremendous rate over the next few years. It's estimated 50% of the entire workforce can retire within the next 10 years. So therefore, what does that mean? That means that the industry, the contractors and suppliers, are going to have to step up and provide expertise in all sorts of areas that they haven't before. It's going to put a greater demand on the private sector. There are a number of ways that we have talked about in the United States about how are we going to fund the future. We could index the motor fuel tax with inflation. We could capture vehicle licenses and registration fees. When we buy a new vehicle, we could tax that. We could put tolls on our existing roads and bridges. These are all possibilities. We could base it on vehicle miles traveled. However, in our country, the idea of big government watching is not a popular idea. Some states currently now, every real estate transaction, every time a piece of real estate is purchased, there is a stamp or a fee charge that goes to transportation. Many local agencies are looking at sales tax options. Every time something is purchased, a sales tax. And then we go back to the general fund. Should roads be victim of the general fund where they can change year to year based on a whim? What we need are long-term funding solutions. And then finally, the public-private partnerships. Some states are entering into those on certain roadway systems as we speak. So what are the changes that we need? Well, we need many changes. First thing is we've got to simplify the way we fund transportation. It's far too complex. There's far too many fingers in the budget package. We've got to create sustainable methods for raising revenues. In our country, we have what we call election year specials. That's when the politicians want to be reelected. So therefore, they raise capital money to throw it out one year, and then there's no follow-up. And that is the worst thing that can happen for the agency, for the contractors, for all, because the private sector gears up for the work only to not have the work the following year. The same with the public sector. It's a loose, bad situation, but it's funded on it's based on politics. We need to remove our non-transportation use of funds. There's too many hangers-on that want to get their hands on monies that were paid for the highway system that are using it for things that are non-transportation. We've got to have a greater mandate on system preservation. We've got to do it earlier. We can't wait until the distress is apparent. We've got to harmonize our condition standards, which means we all better begin measuring the same things, not somebody measuring it different than the next state or the next local agency. Increasing public education is critical because we've all been here before. Unless the public understands our needs, we will not move ahead. We have to inform the public about the link between a healthy, vibrant infrastructure and safety. It's critical. We are losing far too many lives out there because of our pavement conditions. And finally, we have to link the importance, and this has been shown again and again, that the importance of a viable transportation system is linked to a nation's gross national product. Countries that have not got a good transportation system cannot get their goods to market. So it's so critical that we have a viable system. And with that, I appreciate your time and your patience. Thank you very much.